Welcome to Short Movie Channel. The movie begins with an electronics engineer named Joaquin. Joaquin is a paraplegic who lives alone with his dog, Casimiro. He spends most of his time working in the basement of his house. Casimiro is sick, always lying down, and barely moves. Joaquin is waiting for the results of the dog's medical tests, but when the doctor calls, he tells him that Casimiro's condition is psychological and has no cure. Joaquin starts looking for a way to put Casimiro down because he sees him suffering and wants to relieve his pain. He prepares poison and injects it into Casimiro's biscuits to make his death painless. However, at the last moment, Joaquin changes his mind, feeling sorry for the dog, and removes the food. Shortly after, a woman named Berta arrives. She wants to see the 2 rooms that Joaquin has advertised for rent. Joaquin lets her into the house to check them out, and she immediately likes the place. She moves in and, from her first day, tries to talk to Joaquin. However, she notices that he only responds in short, minimal sentences, making it clear that he prefers not to talk. The next day, Berta searches for her daughter, Betty, and tells Joaquin that Betty tends to hide in random places. While looking for her, Berta spots an old, crashed car and assumes it must be the reason behind Joaquin's disability. She then continues searching for Betty and eventually finds her hiding inside a kitchen cabinet. She takes her back to her room, where she later finds several pictures of Joaquin with his wife, daughter, and their dog, Casimiro. She realizes that he must have lost both his wife and daughter. The following day, Berta decides to surprise Joaquin by inviting him to dinner on the rooftop. As they eat, she asks him why he is always so quiet. Joaquin explains that he has lived alone for a long time and has realized he finds peace when he stays away from people. He then mentions that he actually tried talking to Betty, but she didn't respond. Berta tells him that Betty has not spoken in 2 years due to a psychological trauma. As time passes, Joaquin notices that Betty is getting closer to his dog every day. One day, Berta catches Betty trying to hug the dog and immediately pulls her away. Betty is heartbroken, but at that moment, something unexpected happens. Casimiro stands up on his own and begins walking again. Seeing this, Betty's mother lets go of her, and she rushes to hug Casimiro. Joaquin is overwhelmed with happiness that his dog has recovered, but at the same time, he is overcome with sadness. He goes down to the basement, and while he is glad that Casimiro is better, he suddenly remembers his wife and daughter. He breaks down in tears. Suddenly, Joaquin hears strange noises coming from the wall. He moves closer and places a stethoscope against the surface to listen carefully. He hears the voices of several men talking. One of them says they need to lower their voices so the crippled man next door won't hear them. Joaquin realizes they are talking about him. Just then, Berta calls him for dinner. Joaquin secretly places a microphone against the wall, connects it to his computer, and records everything happening on the other side. After dinner, he listens to the recordings and discovers that the men are criminals. He learns that their leader is someone named Galetto and writes down his name along with the names of the other gang members he hears. Joaquin also finds out that their plan is set for the city's upcoming festival, meaning they have 1 week before they execute it. Even more concerning, Joaquin realizes that the criminals are monitoring his movements. He hears them mentioning the sound of his elevator, which signals when he goes upstairs so they can continue their work. Joaquin is confused and doesn't fully understand what's happening, but he knows something suspicious is going on. Determined to get more information, Joaquin installs a small camera inside the wall. When he checks the footage, he sees the men digging a tunnel. That's when he finally confirms that they are preparing for a crime. The next day, Joaquin reviews the security cameras and sees Berta meeting with his uncle, the gang leader. He realizes that they are lovers and that she has been telling him everything happening in his house. He understands that she rented the room as part of their plan to spy on him. That night, he watches the gang as they review their heist plan and learns that they are planning to rob the bank next to his house. They have prepared explosives to blow up the vault floor and have a small vehicle ready to transport the money through a tunnel under his basement. The next day, Joaquin sees Berta talking to his dog and finds it strange. He decides to plant a microphone in the dog's collar to hear exactly what she's saying. Later, he goes down to the basement to review the cameras and sees his uncle torturing one of his men, named Peachy. His uncle is furious because Peachy sent a message from his phone to his girlfriend, revealing the bank's location. Even though Peachy swears he only sent it to reassure her, his uncle doesn't believe him and kills him in a brutal way. Afterward, he orders his right-hand man to dispose of the body. Joaquin is shocked by what he witnesses and realizes that his uncle is a dangerous criminal. That night, Joaquin sits with Berta, gets her to drink a lot until she becomes drowsy, then takes her to her room and injects her with a sedative. He ties her to the bed and tells her he knows everything about their plan. Then, he goes back to the basement and sees his uncle talking to one of his men, Pedro. He learns that Police Chief Joe is the mastermind behind the robbery, providing them with all the necessary information. The chief even gave them the codes to certain safes in the bank, except for a few that belong to a major drug dealer. These particular safes have an advanced alarm system, and if the gang tries to break into them, they will get into serious trouble. Joaquin records everything happening in detail. The next morning, Joaquin prepares breakfast and asks Berta why she's involved with such a dangerous man. She tells him that she met his uncle 2 years ago, and since then, he has treated her and her daughter very well. She insists that he is kind and peaceful. Joaquin then shows her the video of his uncle killing Peachy. Berta is horrified, breaks down in tears, and realizes the truth. Later, she sees Joaquin digging a hole in the basement to reach the tunnel. He sets up a sound and dust-proof barrier. Meanwhile, the gang faces a problem. They discover a public water pipe in the middle of the tunnel. They had miscalculated and deviated from their intended path by 2 meters. Because of this, they decide to modify the tunnel. Joaquin sneaks into the tunnel to check the pipe himself. But on his way back, he notices one of the gang members entering the tunnel. Joaquin quickly hides, covering his face with mud and dirt. Once the gang member leaves, Joaquin rushes back home, only to find that Berta's daughter is missing. Panicked, he searches the house but doesn't find her. He checks the basement cameras and sees that she went through the tunnel and emerged on the gang's side. When they return, she hides under the stairs. A while later, corrupt Police Chief Joe arrives and reviews the final details of the robbery with Joaquin's uncle and the gang. He tells them that they will blow up the vault floor at the exact moment fireworks and missiles go off, so no one will notice the explosion. While they are talking, one of the gang members, Zed, becomes nervous because he lost his watch. He's scared of Joaquin's uncle, but the leader doesn't pay much attention, trusting him completely. After their meeting, they all leave. Berta's daughter quickly runs back through the tunnel. Joaquin opens the hatch, calls her, and pulls her up. He hugs her tightly, but then he notices she's holding the missing watch. He takes it from her and later shows it to Berta. He then plays a recording of her daughter talking to Kashmir, the dog. Berta listens in shock as her daughter reveals that Joaquin's uncle had been harassing her and threatening to kill her if she spoke out. Devastated and furious, Berta wants revenge, blaming her uncle for her daughter's trauma. Joaquin calms her down and promises to take care of him. But as they talk, her phone rings. It's her uncle. He orders her to answer and assure him that everything is going as planned so he doesn't get suspicious and change the plan. And after 2 days, the day of the operation arrives. He moves out before the gang's scheduled departure, goes down into the tunnel, removes one of the bombs from its place, and puts it under a water pipe so that it will explode, break the pipe, and flood the tunnel. After that, he goes under the bank's vault, breaks through its floor, gets out, opens one of the safes, and steals all the money inside. But on his way back, he sees the gang members coming down the tunnel to check on him before the explosion. He quickly rushes back to the bank vault. Suddenly, the bomb explodes, and dust fills the entire tunnel. The gang members turn on the suction system to clear the air, but he takes advantage of the moment, goes back into the tunnel, quickly returns to the basement, and covers up the hole. A few seconds later, 3 of the gang members enter the tunnel and reach the bank vault. They start looting the safes and sending the money to their accomplices in the getaway car. But then, they hear a loud sound of rushing water in the tunnel. One of them goes down to check and is shocked to see that the pipe has burst and water is flooding the tunnel. She can't move and starts yelling for the gang to help her, but the rest of them are trapped in the vault, unable to escape. At that moment, his uncle takes his wife and escapes before the tunnel collapses, leaving the others to drown. Meanwhile, water starts seeping into Joaquin's basement. He grabs the bag of money, rushes upstairs, hides it in the closet, and goes to check on Verta. But to his surprise, she has woken up and attacks him. She tries to tie him to the bed, but he fights back, injects her with a sedative, and forgets to tie her up in his rush. He then quickly takes a shower to wash off the dust so that no one suspects him. Then, he steps out into the street, and finds the place filled with police officers. He asks one of them what's going on, and the officer tells him that his basement is flooded with water, but the cause is unknown. After that, Joe makes a call, asking what's happening. Jorito tells him he has no idea why the pipes exploded. Joe then gathers his men and heads to Joaquin's house, telling him that a robbery took place and that they need to search the house. Without hesitation, Joaquin agrees. As the search begins, Joe silently watches him without saying a word. Suddenly, a phone rings. Joaquin quickly puts it on silent. Joe assumes it's Joaquin's phone, so he picks it up, enters his own number, and tells him to call if anything happens. A little while later, Jorito and his men arrive, claiming to be the police. Joaquin doesn't say anything, knowing that if he does, they might suspect him. Joe then calls Jorito, informing him that the drug dealer's safe has been stolen and that they're in big trouble. But Jorito says he's busy and hangs up the phone. He was sending a message from Berto's phone to Joe, asking him to come to the house quickly. After that, Curto asked Joaquin if anyone was with him in the house. Joaquin replied that there was a woman renting the upstairs room, but she left yesterday. Unfortunately, Joaquin's luck was bad because Betty came out of the room and stood in front of them. He saw her and realized that Joaquin had been lying. At that point, Curto pulled out his gun, attached the silencer, and told him to look behind him. That's when he saw Betty, and Joaquin didn't know how to respond. However, Curto asked him to take her to the room. When Curto saw her in a drugged state, he ordered his men to beat him up. Suddenly, Joe called from Berto's phone, prompting Joaquin to open the door. Curto was surprised that he was calling him at that time, and became suspicious of him. He then tied Joaquin up, threatened to kill him, and asked him how he got Berto's number. Joaquin answered that he got it when he was searching the house with his men. At that moment, Curto realized that Joaquin was very clever, so he threatened him with death and finally asked him to explain what had happened. Joaquin asks Zod to help him, and at that moment, Curto goes crazy and asks him how he knows his name. Zod replies that this is the first time he's ever seen him and doesn't know him. But Joaquin insists that he knows Zod, and they had agreed to rob the bank together before. He says he knows everything, and to make Zod believe him, he shares the full details of the plan. He also reveals that he used to visit every night to spend time with Berta, and that he was the one who drugged her and tied her to the bed. At that moment, Zod realizes it was all a scheme, and he starts shooting at those around him, causing chaos. In that moment, Berta wakes up and kills Curto. After that, Joaquin threatens Joe with a gun, but Joe stays calm and tells him he's the only one who can hide the bodies and erase any evidence of the crime. He offers to do this in exchange for half of the money Joaquin stole from the bank, saying it's the best he can do rather than ruining Joaquin's life. But Joaquin tells him he could destroy his life too by showing his videos. Joe pauses for a moment, eats a piece of the poisoned dog biscuit, and tells Joaquin he's changed his mind. He'll take all the money or else Berta and her daughter will die. Joaquin decides to give him the money and let him go. But the poison starts to take effect, and Joe loses focus, causing a terrible accident, so severe that the bodies fall out of the car's trunk. However, he manages to escape before the car explodes. But the poison continues working, and he dies immediately. A few days later, we see Joaquin selling the house, taking Berta and Casimiro to start a new life somewhere else. And that's how this great movie ends. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel.